sworn to put this man away with any and all legal means at my disposal.
There is something about the Untouchables that grabs you before a single word of dialogue is even spoken. The year was 1987, and moviegoers walked into darkened theaters not knowing they were about to be swept into a tale that felt both grand and intimate, gritty and operatic. It was not just a gangster film, it was a story about courage, about what it costs to take a stand when the world feels completely against you. It was Chicago in the 1930s, a city full of smoke and jazz, of speakeasies and backroom deals, where a man named Al Capone had become so powerful that the law seemed like a suggestion rather than a rule. Then there was Eliot Ness, played with quiet determination by a young Kevin Costner, a man who decided that someone had to take a stand even if he stood alone. Sean Connery stepped into the film with the gravitas of a legend, transforming Jim Malone from a side character into the heart and conscience of the story. Robert De Niro transformed himself into Capone so completely that he felt dangerous even in moments of silence. Andy Garcia, still early in his career, brought a precision and fire to George Stone that made him unforgettable. Together, they became the Untouchables. But what happened off camera was just as fascinating as what ended up on the screen. Behind the scenes, there were long nights in train stations, weeks of planning just for a single scene, heated arguments between the studio and the director over casting choices, and moments where the whole film seemed like it might fall apart. Actors were learning to hold vintage guns as if they had used them all their lives, costume designers researching old Chicago tailors so the suits would hang exactly as they did in 1930, and entire streets were dressed to look like a time long gone. It was a production full of pressure and creativity, of mistakes that turned into magic, and choices that changed careers. Here are 20 weird facts about the Untouchables. Number 20. Bob Hoskins, Almost Capone, The Thank You Payment, and De Palma's First Choice Turmoil. It turns out Robert De Niro was not the only person considered for the role of Al Capone way before filming. Bob Hoskins was approached, sent the script, and had meetings with Brian De Palma about stepping in if De Niro declined. Hoskins did not end up playing the role, but was still paid $200,000 as a sort of gratitude gift for being willing to serve as the backup to Capone. This is strange because Hoskins did nothing visible in the final film but got paid anyway. De Palma was worried about star power. Kevin Costner was not very famous yet in 1987, and the studio was concerned whether audiences would buy him as Eliot Ness. De Niro was seen as more bankable. Costner later said he was intimidated by De Niro in many scenes because De Niro jumped off the page, meaning his presence and energy were overwhelming. Costner felt that his character Ness was very straight, upright, and clean. So in many scenes he had to hold back his emotions. Sometimes Costner said he struggled to match De Niro's intensity. Hoskins being paid but not used highlights how studios hedge risks by paying someone for potential rather than actual contribution, and how casting is a kind of narrative behind the scenes, almost as dramatic as what's on screen. Number 19. Connery's church, oaths, and the filming location's weight on the scene. There is a famous moment in the film where Malone, played by Sean Connery, and Ness, played by Kevin Costner, took a blood oath to fight Capone, and Connery insisted that this oath be filmed inside a Catholic church, not out on the street as originally scripted. He said a church in the 1930s Chicago would feel safe, solemn, weighty, intimate in a way a street could not be. The church used was Our Lady of Sorrows Basilica in Chicago. In interviews, Connery emphasized that since his character Malone serves as the moral compass for Ness early on, the location where the oath takes place had to convey a sense of sanctuary, confession, and moral reckoning. Technically, this scene featured a split-focus diopter effect, meaning both the foreground and background were in sharp focus, even though the actors were at different depths. This was tricky to do. The camera had to remain almost static, the actors had to hold position, the lighting permitted both planes to be lit properly, and there was no intrusive movement. It was a visual trick borrowed from cinematic styles that aimed to convey two emotional planes simultaneously. De Palma used it here to tie Ness and Malone together, even when they occupied different physical spaces, yet were emotionally bound by their pact. Number 18. The baby carriage staircase, Potemkin homage, budget cuts, and actor input in stunts. One of the most famous weird facts is about the Union Station shootout, The stairway, the baby carriage tumbling down the stairs, and the clock. That entire set piece was almost completely different. Initially, the gun battle was supposed to happen on a period train stopped at a station. However, Paramount said restoring or acquiring a 1930s-style train and doing all the period detail would cost too much. They pulled the budget for that idea. De Palma then had to conceive a new, visually striking set of shots almost spontaneously. He storyboarded on the fly, or, as he went along, the idea of the baby carriage rolling down the stairs while the gunfight happened, with George Stone, played by Andy Garcia, sliding to catch it. That sliding move by Stone was actually Andy Garcia's idea, because he said in his younger days he played baseball sliding into base, so visually sliding into fourth base would be something he could do, so he proposed that move to De Palma, who then accepted. The finale of that station sequence is drenched in technical challenge, coordinating stunt performers, controlling crowd movement even though extras are many, timing the carriage dropping, ensuring safety, camera angles to capture both the carriage motion and the gunfire, smoke effects, squibs, lighting through station windows, and the historic architecture of Union Station. All of that had to be done under time pressure because the studio had cut the original idea. De Palma later said in interviews that the pressure got intense, but the result remained one of the most memorable action scenes of the 80s. Number 17, the Hardy Bridge Canadian whiskey sequence, local horses, trees, and time pressures. The scene where Elliot Ness and his men intercept a Canadian whiskey shipment, riding horses and working with Mounties, was shot on Hardy Bridge near Great Falls, Montana. However, in the story, it is meant to represent the US-Canada border. For that sequence, the production actually closed the bridge to traffic for a 2-week window, specifically from October 6 through 20th, 1986. They also brought in 25 local residents to ride as Royal Canadian Mounted Police, bought or rented a number of 2019 20s and 30s era vehicles from places around Conrad and Great Falls, hauled in 600 trees from Lincoln and Kalispell areas, and planted them in a day and a half to dress the background. Hence, it looked like the woods and cabins of a period northern country. Number 16, almost black and white, lamp poles, antennas, and the struggle for period authenticity. Stephen Burum, the DP, tried very hard to convince De Palma to shoot the film in monochrome, to capture the feel of newspapers, photos, films from the Depression era, because to many people, old period crime dramas feel like black and white. De Palma refused, insisted on color, Technicolor. So to get the period feel, they instead redressed streets, altered light fixtures, removed modern lamp poles, took down or hid TV antennas, blocked off fluorescent modern signage or lighting on buildings at night, used flags, cloths, or covers to mask neon or modern lighting on facades so that at night nothing out of period would leak into shots. They also found neighborhoods where the architecture still had that Prohibition-era look or could be made to pass for it. Downtown Chicago was challenging because skyscrapers and modern glass facades as well as modern windows were everywhere. Burum said in interviews that no matter which way you turned the camera, you risked capturing something modern. Night scenes helped because dark skies masked lots, and they could flag off lights and drop in practical period lamps. Number 15. Bob Hoskins, Script Hatred, Mamet's Cut closing text, and Wolf the Consultant. Bob Hoskins was cast as the backup plan for Al Capone in case Robert De Niro refused or couldn't do it, and in return he got a pay-or-play deal, which meant he would be paid even if he did not shoot. Hoskins later called it the best job I ever had. The script from David Mamet was not universally beloved inside Paramount. One of the executives, Ned Tannen, reportedly said it was a piece of dreck. Producer Art Linson insisted on keeping Mamet's version anyway, including some of the grittiness. Mamet later said they cut out the textual epilogue and closing information about what happened after Prohibition, or about Ness's later life, even though originally he had written that in. To get realism in the portrayal of Ness's Untouchables team, they brought in Al Wallpaper Wolf, who at the time was 85 and one of the real surviving Untouchables, as a consultant. He advised actors on how real men walked, their posture, and how raids sometimes resulted in empty rooms, as well as how they sometimes expected violence but still had to behave with restraint. As a thank you, Wolf was given free tickets to the premiere, approximately 160 of them. Number 14. Location choices: Union Station staircase, carriage, and actor Andy Garcia's input. Union Station in Chicago is where the famous baby carriage stair scene was filmed, and that staircase is real. Those steps exist, and it was used to shoot the dramatic juxtaposition of innocence, baby carriage, and brutal violence. Andy Garcia suggested the sliding catch of the carriage scene. In rehearsal, he said that when the carriage falls, he could slide down the stairs, catch it, which gives a visual rhythm, a human motion, and urgency rather than just letting it tumble. De Palma allowed that idea. That sliding motion was partly choreographed on set, partly improvised, relying on Garcia's athleticism. Some sources imply this, although not all interviews agree. However, the sliding is usually attributed to Garcia's input. They had to coordinate dozens of extras, stunt people, safety ropes, camera angles, smoke, and muzzle flash to ensure that the baby carriage doesn't get harmed, that the stunt people are safe, that the baby imagery doesn't verge into cruel spectacle, so there was a lot of rehearsal of that sequence. De Palma secretly stashed extra raw film stock so that even though the studio was pushing to wrap up production, he could film enough for that sequence. Without that extra raw stock, the baby carriage staircase might not have been done. Number 13. Armani, Marilyn Vance, fashion choices, and the blur between decades. The costumes in The Untouchables were a collaboration between Marilyn Vance Straker, costume designer, and Giorgio Armani, tailor. And the result was fascinating because they neither fully committed to rigid 1930 accuracy nor drifted into obvious 80s pastiche. Instead, they blended, they shaded, they leaned. Armani supplied many of the suits, especially for Ness, played by Kevin Costner, whose primary three-piece suit is a medium gray flannel wool piece with emphasized shoulders and legs and a vest, waistcoat, pulling in a slimmer middle, creating a slightly athletic profile. Shirts for Ness vary between plain white cotton with a point collar and double cuffs, and striped white shirts with thin dark blue stripes. Ties shift between solid burgundy silk foulard patterns and more splashy splotch patterns. Trousers are pleated with a high rise, side pockets, a generous fit through gently flaring legs, and a plain hem with a medium break over the shoes. Coat pieces. One is a light brown gabardine long coat with large lapels, raglan sleeves, and oversized fit. Another is the gray raincoat used in the train station sequence, broader and heavier with a storm flap, a half belt in back, and a vent in the center. The villain costumes are even more deliberate. Robert De Niro demanded to be dressed in clothing that replicated Al Capone's actual wardrobe, tracking down Capone's original tailors for the courts, including the overcoats and even the underwear. His costumes were made to match. The designers paid close attention. De Niro's courtroom suit, a light gray three-piece with broad shoulders, featured hip pockets that sit flat, and even monogramming on dressing gowns to mirror the opulence attributed to Capone. Number 12. Wolf, character movement, weapons handling, and Ness's physicality. Albert H. Wallpaper Wolf, one of the real-life Untouchables, worked as a consultant on the film. He not only taught Kevin Costner how Ness walked, slowly, deliberately with weight, because Ness was meant to be passive in manner until forced into action, but also how weapons of that period were handled, such as shotguns and pistols. He taught him how to hold them, move with them, how to cock the weapons, recoil, and how much pause to take before pulling the trigger. All those tiny things mattered. In an interview, Wolf said he told Costner, "When you take the gun out, be ready to use it because it's your life or their life." Ness, being a man of law, restraint, but also danger, these lessons made many of his reaction scenes more grounded. Costner, in interviews, spoke about how Ness had to constantly know how many men were left alive in a battle, where bullets were coming from, who was adjacent, and what the terrain was like. This meant that in the stair station shootout scene, Costner requested to rehearse the positions of the attackers, the location of the baby carriage, the placement of the stairs where extras would fall, and how smoke would drift. It was not just acting, it was almost dance, almost stunt choreography. The staircase shootout was reportedly storyboarded partially on the fly, but also heavily rehearsed in terms of movements and blocking. De Palma, in some interviews, admitted that some shots were conceived during shooting, adapting for light, extras, and space. Number 11. Buram's visual plans, color, frame, and Chicago as character. Stephen H. Buram, the director of photography, had strong ideas. He wanted initially to shoot the film in black and white. The studio rejected that. So instead, Buram conceived a compositional plan using repetitive images, featuring cars of the same make, parked on both sides of a street, with matched windows and light fixtures, to create a sense of period uniformity. The intention was that, even though color was present, the film would evoke a sense of something remembered, akin to a photograph or newspaper clipping rather than a flashy modern moment. Lighting is designed to accentuate shadows and silhouettes, providing contrast in night scenes or at dawn and dusk. Scenes are framed so that you notice what is not there: modern signs and lampposts. Thus, the set dressing and locations are carefully chosen to carry the weight of a past era. Chicago, Union Station, interiors in Capone's mansion offices. Many of these had to be visually stripped of modern accretions. Number 10. Brian De Palma's tone, scenes changed, shifts from Mamet's script. In the original Mamet screenplay, certain scenes and ideas were altered or dropped during production or filming. For example, a more elaborate rescue scene planned for the train witness extraction was considered too complicated and too expensive, so it was replaced or modified by what became the Union Station stair shootout sequence. De Palma admitted that in many cases he sketched shots as he went filming, improvising to budget, space, or lighting constraints. The stair scene itself was not originally in the script in that location, having been shifted from another idea or an earlier version. Cast interviews reveal that Kevin Costner and Sean Connery sometimes butted heads over tone. Connery wanted Malone to project more warmth and moral gray, to ground Ness not only in law but also in compassion. Costner's Ness was cleaner, stiffer, and more idealized. De Palma balanced this by giving Malone a colorful costume, a relaxed manner, and allowing Connery to add lib bits, especially in small moments off-duty, while keeping Ness mostly rigid until moments of crisis. Additionally, De Palma's decision to enlist Morricone for the score lends weight. Music effectively builds suspense as the scene transitions from home to the streets, to violence, and ultimately to moral reckoning. The Union Station lullaby theme, Morricone plays against the violence, creating a juxtaposition that humanizes the fear and terror. Number 9. De Niro's weight gain and obsession with real Capone details. Robert De Niro is one of those actors who completely disappears into a character, and for Al Capone, he reached a level that almost bordered on historical reenactment. He intentionally gained nearly 30 pounds, not with quick gimmicks but by eating heavy Italian meals 3 times a day for several weeks before filming began, telling interviewers that he wanted the extra weight to change how he carried himself, so that when he entered a room he did not just act heavy, he was heavy. De Niro traveled to Chicago before production and personally visited Capone's old tailor shop, which still existed at the time, and had the surviving tailors recreate Capone's suits exactly, even down to the same kind of inner linings and padded shoulders that made Capone's silhouette iconic. He had real two-tone wingtip shoes made to Capone's exact measurements, so that when he walked across a floor in a scene, you could hear the weight in each step, a small detail that De Niro believed would sell the performance. This attention to detail extended to his personal grooming. He shaved the front of his head to mimic Capone's receding hairline, wore the same style of monogrammed silk underwear, even though the camera never saw it, and carried real Cuban cigars in his pocket so that when he held one, his fingers would naturally smell of smoke. This extreme authenticity paid off on screen. Capone does not just feel like a movie villain. He feels like a man who truly owned Chicago in 1930. Number 8. The Union Station sequence and the endless nights of filming. If there is one scene most people remember from The Untouchables, it is the Union Station shootout with Kevin Costner's Elliot Ness crouched on the steps. At the same time, a baby carriage slowly tumbles downward as bullets fly. This scene was Brian De Palma's deliberate homage to the Odessa Steps massacre sequence in Sergei Eisenstein's Battleship Potemkin from 1925, a classic piece of Soviet montage editing that changed cinema forever. To stage it properly, production closed Union Station for almost 2 straight weeks, filming only at night after the last trains had departed. Each evening, dozens of extras in period costumes would assemble to play commuters, policemen, gunmen, and bystanders, while the crew carefully reset the staircase and rigged squibs for gunshot effects. The carriage was let go again and again, sometimes missing its mark or turning too early, and De Palma was notorious for calling for another take, even when the difference was almost invisible. The director wanted the rhythm of the carriage bouncing, the gunshots firing, and the camera moves to feel like a dance of chaos. Cinematographer Stephen H. Burham had to light the entire grand hall so that it looked bright enough for the camera while still evoking the yellowed glow of 1930s lamps, hiding modern fixtures out of sight. By the end of shooting, some crew members joked that they could walk the steps blindfolded, having climbed and descended them hundreds of times. The final sequence runs for only a few minutes on screen. It was one of the most technically complex and expensive parts of the entire film, consuming a significant portion of the production schedule. Number 7. Sean Connery's accent battle and his Oscar win. Sean Connery's character, Jim Malone, is supposed to be an Irish-American beat cop, but Connery famously refused to change his natural Scottish accent completely. He once said in an interview that De Palma tried to coach him into a more Chicago-Irish dialect, but Connery replied that audiences would forgive him as long as the performance felt truthful. It certainly did. Connery's tough, fatherly Malone became the emotional heart of the film. For the famous church scene where he delivers the line about bringing a knife to a gunfight, Connery reportedly worked with Mamet on set to find the right pacing so that the line landed as half sermon, half street threat. His role earned him the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor at the ceremony held in 1988, his only Oscar win in a career that spanned decades. Connery later said that of all the characters he had played, Malone was one of his favorites because he represented an old-world honor code, a man who believed that law enforcement was not just a job, but a calling. That sense of moral weight is what made Malone's death scene so devastating. Connery insisted that Malone's final moments be shot in one long take so that the audience would stay with him as he crawled across the floor trying to tell Ness who the accountant was. He said he wanted people to feel every second of Malone's struggle. Number 6. Morricone's music and the reluctant seventh piece. Ennio Morricone, the legendary Italian composer, approached the score with his usual intensity, writing 9 completely different versions of the main hero theme for Ness and his men. He reportedly argued with De Palma about which one to use, warning him not to pick the 7th version because Morricone felt it was too bombastic and obvious. De Palma, of course, chose that exact 7th version, saying it gave the team a sense of marching into battle. Morricone later admitted that once he saw the music paired with the images, including Ness walking through Chicago streets and the team forming, he understood why it worked. The score is a fascinating mix of moods. Bold brass and swagger for Capone, mournful strings for Ness's personal doubts, and suspenseful rhythmic percussion for the raid sequences. Morricone was nominated for an Academy Award for the score, although he did not win at the time. He won his first competitive Oscar, decades later, for The Hateful Eight. Today, his Untouchables theme is considered one of the most memorable of the 1980s and is often used in highlight reels of great movie music. Number 5. Patricia Clarkson, Extra Pay and Casting Grace. Patricia Clarkson was cast as Catherine Ness at a time when she was still finding her feet as an actress, fresh out of Yale School of Drama. She had very few credits and little experience on a set of this scale, but Brian De Palma noticed something in her presence that he wanted to protect and develop. Her role could have been much smaller and wrapped up quickly, but De Palma believed that keeping her present in key family moments would give Eliot Ness more emotional weight and human context. Initially, the schedule had her rapping before the final courtroom sequence. Still, De Palma made the unusual choice of extending her contract so that she would appear again in the film's final moments. That decision delayed her rap by about 1 month and provided her with additional income, which she has admitted came at a time when she was living hand-to-mouth in New York, juggling rent and student debt. Clarkson has reflected that being kept around longer allowed her to soak up the energy of the set and watch great actors like Sean Connery and Robert De Niro work up close, which became a kind of private masterclass in screen acting. She has said that she learned subtle things, like how to position her body for the camera and how to hold silence in a scene so that it played truthfully. De Palma's decision also demonstrated that he prioritized the integrity of the story over cutting costs and rushing through the shoot, as keeping a secondary character on contract necessitated adjusting schedules and budgets. Paramount was willing to take that expense, which added to the sense that Ness was not just a lawman, but a husband and father whose decisions had private consequences. Clarkson later credited that small break for helping her land her next roles, because casting directors could see her sharing screen time with Kevin Costner in a major motion picture, and that credibility pushed her career forward. Number 4. Reinventing genre and Western influences in the production of Stories documentary. The Special Collector's Edition. DVD of The Untouchables features a documentary called Production Stories, in which Brian De Palma and producer Art Linson share vivid memories of shaping the movie into something much larger than a standard gangster thriller. They often discuss how they wanted the film to feel like a mythic tale of justice, where one man and his allies stood against a rising tide of organized crime, echoing the structure of classic westerns directed by John Ford. De Palma bought the idea of Elliot Ness as a sheriff figure riding into a lawless town and slowly gathering a posse, each man different in temperament but united in purpose. This vision shaped not just the casting but also the cinematography, which often frames Ness against wide-open Chicago streets or on windswept bridges so that he feels small against the vastness of the city, yet determined to stand his ground. De Palma also fought hard behind the scenes to assemble his dream cast. She was prepared to walk away when Paramount initially balked at paying Robert De Niro the salary he demanded. De Palma believed De Niro would bring a gravitas to Capone that no one else could match, and ultimately the studio relented, agreeing to a higher budget allocation for casting. The result was a performance that many critics called one of the most chilling portrayals of power in all of 1980s cinema. They also continued to discuss the way David Mamet's script was deliberately stylized, featuring terse dialogue and dramatic pauses, borrowing from Western traditions where silences could be just as important as gunfire. De Palma encouraged his actors to continue relentlessly leaning into that memory and creating moments where the tension is much more unbearable, leading up to a sudden burst of action. The finished film became both a crime drama and a morality play, borrowing visual language from Westerns to remind viewers that even in the industrial age, there are still stories of lawmen standing alone against impossible odds. Number 3. Continuity goofs, prop variations, costume slips, and visual mistakes. Although the film is renowned for its visual polish and period detail, it is not without its mistakes. For instance, in one moment on the bridge, when Oscar Wallace runs through a leaking barrel, his clothes are completely wet. Then, in the next cut, they are dry again, which violates continuity. Another is a note from Ness's wife, reading, "I am very proud of you." It appears in 3 separate scenes, but the prop is different each time. In Capone's bribery attempt in Ness's office, Ness throws the envelope back at the man, and the envelope bounces off the man's shoulder off camera. Yet less than 2 seconds later, Ness picks the same envelope up from his desk in a way that seems impossible given where it bounced. Aside from such prop and continuity issues, there are anachronistic transportation elements, such as seeing vehicles or bus types that would not have been in operation in Chicago in 1930. Additionally, during some dialogues, Malone's shirt is buttoned in one take. In the very next scene, his shirt is unbuttoned at the same spot, despite nothing in the action suggesting a change. This kind of variation reveals the difficulty of maintaining perfect consistency when using multiple extras, numerous locations, frequent costume changes, and varied camera angles, even under the guidance of an experienced director and crew. Number 2. Opening essay scene, nostalgia, idle, and sudden violence. The film opens with a peaceful, almost picturesque scene set under Chicago's elevated train tracks in Wrigleyville in 1930. A 10-year-old girl walks across a dusty street carrying a bucket of milk. Past her, Ford Model Ts roll by, an elevated train car passes overhead, and pedestrians amble across sidewalks. The light seems soft, the world quiet. Then inside a neighborhood pub, the counterman finishes serving her, and conversation drifts. The notion of no green beer for that pub is voiced. A man in a white suit, forgetting a briefcase, is noticed by the girl as he hurries away. Moments later, a blast rips apart part of the building. The contrast is brutal. Nostalgia is shattered immediately. That sets the tone for the rest of the film in many ways, the dream of old Chicago splashed with violence, corruption, and moral compromise. The essay by Brian Eggert in Deep Focus Review points out that the opening aims to evoke memories audiences carry of bygone eras, not necessarily as they were, but as they imagine them. Before the Volstead Act was repealed, before Prohibition became a national shame, the film keeps pulling that nostalgia apart through moral dilemmas and violence that is not glorified. That opening scene also demanded careful staging, period dress, cars, signs, sidewalks, conversations, set design, and lighting, so that it all looks like the past before reality intruded. Number 1. Kevin Costner's audition pressure and sudden rise. Kevin Costner was not yet a household name when he landed the role of Elliot Ness. He had appeared in a few films such as Silverado and Fandango, but had not yet carried a major studio picture on his shoulders. Paramount executives reportedly sought a more bankable star and considered actors like Mel Gibson, Don Johnson, and even Tom Berenger, who were already known for their tough, heroic roles. However, director Brian De Palma felt strongly that Costner brought a quiet integrity and moral weight that could anchor the story. During his auditions, Costner read from multiple versions of David Mamet's script, some of which were darker and others that leaned more towards heroism. He later said that he felt enormous pressure to prove that he could balance both sides of Ness, the determined lawman and the family man with a soft center. He trained with period-accurate weapons, including the Thompson submachine gun, learning how to handle and reload it with the precision of a Prohibition-era federal agent so that nothing would look out of place on screen. Once filming began, Costner kept himself in a focused bubble, trying to inhabit Ness as completely as possible. He spent hours talking with Sean Connery, who offered him advice on staying grounded amid the pressure of leading such a large production. Connery reportedly told him to never let them see you sweat and to trust the camera to do half the work if he just stayed truthful in the scene. By the time production wrapped, Costner had earned the respect of the cast and crew, who saw how seriously he took his preparation. The gamble paid off because audiences responded not just to the action, but to the heart that Costner gave the character, making Ness feel like someone real whose victories and losses mattered. The film's box office success pushed Costner into the front rank of Hollywood leading men. Within just 2 years, he was starring in Bull Durham and Field of Dreams, and by the end of the decade, he was directing and winning Academy Awards for Dances with Wolves. He has often said in interviews that if Brian De Palma had not believed in him at that early stage, the entire arc of his career might have been delayed or even changed forever. Having watched this, what do you think about The Untouchables, 1987? Kindly share your thoughts in the comments and ensure to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.